His first appearance on screen was as an extra in a movie with Rutger Hauer. That one was shot in Belgium. Some Hawkeye there told Van Damme that, with such talents, he should conquer Hollywood. And that's exactly what he did. But there's a catch. Young Van Damme struggled to break through in Hollywood for a long time. For many years he was a taxi driver, pizza delivery man, and even a construction worker. 5 years, no roles. But in 1984, he managed to get a role in the short film Monaco Forever. Jean-Claude portrayed a gay karate fighter in it. The movie was a failure, but Van Damme got lucky. That year, he met another karate fighter, Chuck Norris, and became his partner. Sparring partner. Chuck gave Jean-Claude the opportunity to be a stunt double in the film Missing in Action. Thanks to Chuck, Van Damme got his foot in Cannon Films' doors, a studio he was running around in hopes of getting any role. That opportunity came with the movie Breakin' It, where Jean-Claude can be noticed in the background. He says, at some point he performed his famous split, but the mean director cut that moment out. While Jean-Claude was sweet-talking Chuck in the Cannon studio, he managed to get married successfully for the second time and became a manager in his wife's father's construction company, where he had previously worked. Jean-Claude caught some Russian swearing there, and that helped him get his first real role in No Retreat, No Surrender. Russian sukabliat would come in handy again a bit later for Van Damme, but we'll get to that. So shooting No Retreat, No Surrender had some issues. Everyone improvised on set, and the Belgian took full advantage of this to showcase all his talents. Colleagues complained Jean-Claude didn't understand they were just soft and gentle actors, not sparring partners that could actually be punched full power. Apparently that's what sparring with Chuck Norris does to a person. They say someone was even taken to a hospital once. Such behavior became the actor's trademark for a while. Thanks to the success of No Retreat, No Surrender, Van Damme was noticed, and he managed to get into Bloodsport. Before moving there, let's stick with an honorable mention, a lesser-known Jean-Claude role as a predator in the eponymous film. In reality, that's not quite accurate. According to Arnold Schwarzenegger, Van Damme complained and fainted from the heat more than he actually filmed. But even that wasn't his main problem. Most likely, seeing Arnold's name, Jean-Claude signed the contract immediately and didn't bother to read it. How else can you explain his dissatisfaction with the fact that the Predator costume hid his pretty actor's face? There's also another version. During the filming of the confrontation scene between Arnold and the Predator, the director noticed Van Damme looked too tiny next to the gigantic Arnold and decided to replace him with someone more impressive. The versions that Jean-Claude injured someone with his high kicks on set are ridiculous. The cast was full of huge, ripped guys, and there's a suspicion they didn't give a damn about all these magic infinite spins. Since Jean-Claude later had a cameo in McTiernan's movie with Schwarzenegger, I assume he was a good boy this time. The role in Bloodsport changed everything for Jean-Claude. He got into this film directly after No Retreat, No Surrender. Bloodsport was based on real events, supposedly. A participant in the real events was so pissed at Jean-Claude's physique that he made him sit in a split and meditate for the next 3 months until his muscles grew big enough. The movie didn't work, so the post-production period dragged on. Meanwhile, Jean-Claude managed to portray another Tovarish in the film Black Eagle. We all remember how dramatically and realistically the Belgian got smacked in his best movies, and that made his revenge afterwards so satisfying and rewarding. Jean-Claude realized that if Bloodsport didn't succeed, the actor risked being stuck as a punching bag. That's why he refused to shoot a scene in which his character would die at the hands of the protagonist, not because the mean Japanese fought back on set much better than the soft American actors. Sure. Right. Whatever it was the right thing to do. Black Eagle went straight to video, and Van Damme's shame went unnoticed. Bloodsport gathered dust on the shelf for about 2 years, and it seemed impossible to make something that would satisfy the producers. The movie was about to be released straight to video, but Van Damme intervened. They say he spent several months re-editing the film, and the result finally pleased the bosses. The home release earned the studio $11 million on a budget of just $1 million. Critics wanted to award him a golden raspberry, but Van Damme didn't care. Cannon studio bosses knew who had saved their butts. Same trick was also once pulled by another street fighter with a bad attitude. When this video receives 1,000 likes, I will release a video about him. In Cyborg, Van Damme was filmed with a broken camera, on a mobile phone, from a well-known old Finnish brand. The sets were reused from 2 other films, including a cancelled Spider-Man action movie. Cyborg had a budget of 2 bags of peanuts and a beer can with a production deadline like yesterday. Predictably, the test screenings were a disaster, and Jean-Claude had to once again use his marvelous Belgian editing skills to save Cannon Studios. The film grossed $10 million on a budget of $500,000, But even this miracle couldn't keep Cannon alive for long. Cannon's decline only had a positive effect on Van Damme's career later on. On Cyborg's set, Van Damme overdid it and injured one of the actor's eyes. All the beaten and humiliated actors from No Retreat, No Surrender immediately showed up at court as well. Van Damme had to pay the newborn pirate the sum he demanded, which was known to be more than $10,000, but probably much more. Jean-Claude's next movie, Kickboxer, received a more decent budget, $1.5 million. This one can rightfully be considered the quintessential Van Damme film. He choreographed the fight scenes, and it was this film that started Jean-Claude's affection for showing his buttocks on screen. This lovely trend continued and flourished in the next movies. Despite such awesomeness, critics were unimpressed and called Van Damme a hillbilly version of Schwarzenegger. But Jean-Claude didn't care. The film grossed $15 million in the US, alone on a budget of $1.5 million, and made the Belgian a rising action star. And in his next movie, he was determined to prove to Hollywood he could not only kick and gallop but also act. Same did Brad Pitt once, and it was disturbing. Check it out here. Anyway, Van Damme's subsequent films such as Lionheart, Death Warrant, Double Impact, and Universal Soldier consistently grossed more and more at the box office. Van Damme gradually became a highly in-demand action actor. Lionheart was filmed by Imperial, which had signed a 2-film contract with Van Damme during the making of Black Eagle. There was no script or ideas, but the obligation to shoot remained, so Van Damme had to come up with the concept himself and participate in writing the script. Universal distributed the film. That was huge, as Jean-Claude moved from B-tier projects to mainstream cinema. Death Warrant was produced by the Cannon Group, which went bankrupt before the film was released. That's exactly why the movie looks so cheap. The film transferred to MGM Studio, which assembled it poorly and released it after several years without any promotion. Despite that, it managed to collect a decent box office. With a budget of $4 million, it grossed more than $16 million. Most likely, the studio made a ton of money by releasing the movie on home media, but no reliable info can be found about that. Double Impact was the first movie in which Van Damme played 2 roles, earning positive reviews from both critics and audiences. Through Twins, the film managed to satisfy fans of both sides of the Belgian, the sweetie pie heartbreaker, and the masculine alpha savage. As part of the promotion for Universal Soldier, Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren staged a conflict on the red carpet of the Cannes Film Festival. That can and should be considered a successful viral marketing attempt. At that time, Jean-Claude did everything he could to promote and enhance his movies. In the romantic drama Nowhere to Run, Rosanna Arquette stated it was originally supposed to be a serious film with Mel Gibson without any action. But Van Damme stormed in and made the new screenwriter, Leslie Bohem, rewrite everything, adding fights and punches. The only thing left from the original script was the storyline of the escaped convict and the widow with 2 children. Joe Esther has wrote the original version of the screenplay and publicly disowned the film after these changes. For Nowhere to Run, the Belgian received his highest fee at the time, $2.5 million. On the set of Hard Target, Jean-Claude undressed with admirable regularity, and the director John Woo had to hastily cut out all this greatness to get the desired age rating. After 7 re-edits, the final version still did not satisfy the superstar. Van Damme felt there was too little of his own amazing self in the movie, so he decided to use his marvelous Belgian editing skills again, but this time Top Dogs didn't allow it. The Magister Sam Raimi was producing the movie, and he defended John Woo's vision, so he had the final say. The movie became one of Van Damme's best, grossing $74 million with a budget of $18 million. Hard Target marked John Woo's spectacular debut in Hollywood. Thanks to him, we got masterpieces like Hard Boiled and Face Off. Time Cop, released in 1994, can be considered Van Damme's actor magnum opus. It's one of his best works, according to critics. Time Cop was based on a Dark Horse comic book and was one of Jean-Claude's 2 projects that grossed over $100 million. Expectedly, after reaching such a success streak, the Belgian's self-esteem skyrocketed to phenomenal heights. The next movie was probably the turning point in Van Damme's career. He had to choose between 2 films based on popular fighting games. Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. Mortal Kombat would have been a better choice, yes. It's obvious like now in present days. But back then, it wasn't. Check it out yourself. Street Fighter had a bigger budget and paid more, $8 million. The franchise was more successful. The director wrote the scripts for Die Hard 48 Hours and Commando. He had the support of powerful producer Edward Pressman, known for Wall Street and Conan the Barbarian, and Mortal Kombat was directed by some suspicious unknown, Paul Anderson. So it seemed reasonable to choose Street Fighter. and that's precisely what Jean-Claude did. The film had a bunch of problems: constant script revisions, issues with the Thai authorities, and as a cherry on top, the stomach cancer of the main antagonist, Raul Julia. But even all that would not have been so bad if not for Van Damme. In his words, he was spending up to $10,000 a week on cocaine at the time, and the best thing he could have done for the success of Street Fighter was to stop getting high. Van Damme would either show up on set cocked up or hungover. Pretty often, he didn't show up at all, stating his muscles were in great need to be properly pumped. The Belgian's behavior was really nasty. He was sassy, mean, inadequate, and pissed everyone off. Frankly speaking, the director, Steven D'Souza, can't be blamed. He acted like a real G of all Gs, finishing the movie on Capcom's deadline. It required multiple script revisions and rewrites, reshooting half the film, and relocating shooting from Thailand to Australia. Technically, Street Fighter wasn't a failure. The domestic box office was weak, but international did the trick and made $99 million on a $35 million budget. However, critics and audiences hated the movie. Even more important here is that rumors about Jean-Claude's nasty behavior quickly spread throughout Hollywood. Producers didn't want to work with him anymore, and screenwriters stopped writing scripts for him. Street Fighter was so pathetic it was even ranked the 27th worst film in history by Empire magazine. But everything was going to get even worse than that. The next film, Sudden Death, was rejected by everyone: Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and even Bruce Willis. Stallone called the script raw and unfinished, and Bruce Willis didn't understand why he was invited to a Die Hard copycat. While he was preparing to shoot the third Die Hard originally, Sudden Death was funnier and more comedic. It was supposed to be a parody action movie, at least according to the original scriptwriter Randy Feldman. The only scene left from his script was the fight with the hockey club mascot, and that sounds pretty sick. Look at Arnold's career path during this period. So here as well, the comedic approach could make the movie stand out. But our hero, Jean-Claude, decided to remove all the jokes and make a serious action thriller. For this film, the Belgian received an impressive fee of $5 million, and it was the last time he got something like that. The movie failed domestically and made $64 million internationally. It might not look like a flop to you, but considering all the expenses and fees, it wasn't enough for the studio to return its $35 million budget. I explained box office economics in this video about the Terminator franchise. Check it out afterward. So for Jean-Claude, this was something new and alarming. The planned sequel was immediately canceled. Jean-Claude understood where his career was heading. Remembering Bloodsport, he decided only Van Damme could save Van Damme. His contract with Universal allowed him to release one more film. So he wrote the script, called the movie The Quest, and wanted Oliver Stone to direct it. Stone got it right and politely declined. In the end, Van Damme had to direct the film himself. As if it wasn't enough, Jean-Claude got a lawsuit from his former Bloodsport partner Frank Dux. Frank claimed Van Damme had not paid him for consulting on the script and presumably stole his story. Dux lost in court, but the Writers Guild was on his side. Similar to Sudden Death, The Quest underperformed at the box office. Universal could no longer ignore Van Damme's recurring failures and terminated the contract with him. Jean-Claude then signed with Columbia Pictures and tried to repeat the twin trick from Double Impact, impressing critics with the film Maximum Risk. However, the critics weren't fooled this time, and in some territories the movie went straight to video. In Double Team, Jean-Claude starred alongside his friend Mickey Rourke. Van Damme's films had maintained some level of profitability up to that point. The unbearable weight of Rourke's massive talent sank the movie. With a budget of $30 million, the film grossed only $11 million. Critics hated it, but most of the criticism was directed at basketball player Dennis Rodman. He received 3 Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst Screen Duo with Van Damme. One should feel sympathy for Rourke here. At the time, it seemed his career was reviving. But with this film, he again fell flat on his face. Columbia Pictures got burned twice and realized Jean-Claude wouldn't succeed. In the next movie, Van Damme starred with Rob Schneider. What could go wrong? Sony distributed the film, and this single flop was enough for them to stop working with the Belgian. A streak of Jean-Claude's bad luck started. One after another, his movies were going straight to home video, and former karate mates pounced on him, exposing Van Damme's fake talent. Some even tried to challenge him to professional fights, but Jean-Claude refused, understanding who would benefit more from this. He continued to punch his peers, though, and one story stands out in particular. Stallone mentioned in one of his interviews that there was a conflict between Steven Seagal and Van Damme around this time. It happened at Sly's party. Seagull listened to some enlightened internet experts and confronted Van Damme about his karate skills, with his signature arrogance, of course. Jean-Claude kept his cool and offered to throw some fists to prove his point. Like a true Aikido master, Seagull declined and left. A fight between such titans would inevitably lead to the annihilation of all existence, that's obvious. Jean-Claude wasn't concerned for the fate of the world, though. He followed Seagull to some nightclub and challenged him again. Stallone did not reveal how the story ended, only ominously concluding that Van Damme proved to be stronger. So, it seems Seagull got smacked after all. Jean-Claude later said that around this time, Universal approached him with an offer to make 3 films at $12 million each. Pretty hard to believe that, considering his history of flops with this studio. But Van Damme insists that it did happen, and that this refusal was what finally got him canceled in Hollywood, not because he was a naughty boy and his films flopped at the box office. Jean-Claude continued to participate in movies that went straight to home video. Some of them were canceled before the release. For example, Universal Soldier: The Return was so terrible that everyone pretended it never happened, and future sequels would simply ignore it. Everyone destroyed this movie, and it marked the end of the Belgian's mainstream career. It is hard to imagine the psychological pressure Van Damme felt during this period, as the budgets of his films were only reducing, and none of his films were released in American cinemas. Around this time, Jean-Claude was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Those who understand what the heck that is get it now. Jean-Claude wasn't shy talking about his illness in interviews, saying at times he was the nicest young gentleman on the planet, and sometimes, well, sometimes you would have just instantly hated him, let's say that. In 1999, the Belgian attempted another comeback, again using his marvelous Belgian editing skills. The Inferno movie even got some ovations during test screenings. After all, the film was directed by the person who made the first Rocky and the Karate Kid and produced by Evzen Kohler, who also produced Double Impact. But Van Damme decided that such success wasn't enough, and it could be even greater. However, this time, after his marvelous editing, the miracle didn't happen. The movie was released straight on home video. But even more crap was going down the road. During this period, there was also a story of a club brawl where Jean-Claude had a conflict with his former bodyguard Chuck Zito. He was then dating Van Damme's 4th ex-wife, and the actor confronted Chuck, saying he doesn't have a heart. After mutual insults and some flexing, a scuffle took place. According to Mickey Rourke, if not for his incredible boxing talent, Van Damme would have been done for. Club owners confirmed the story, but many witnesses said Jean-Claude was casually giving autographs as if nothing had happened. No signs of injury also weren't there, like any court cases or comments from Van Damme himself. The story could be true, or just a fake blown up by the tabloids, but either way, it left a bad taste in the mouth. Jean-Claude continued to star in films that went straight to home video, and his old habits remained. He kept making movies where he played twins and broke his hands on movie colleagues. Some of these films were released in cinemas in certain European countries, but they grossed a few bucks. Around 2008, Jean-Claude had a glimmer of hope with the JCVD movie. It was released in French cinemas. The film is notable as it's probably the only genuinely good one with Van Damme in many years. It received a ton of positive reviews, saying Jean-Claude unexpectedly showed his dramatic side. For 7 minutes straight, he turns his soul inside out in a monologue about his thorny path and complicated fate. Critics from Time magazine even said that if it weren't for Heath Ledger, the Oscar that year should have gone to Van Damme. However, the film flopped at the box office, possibly because Jean-Claude did not participate in its promotion. He later explained that his dog, named Scarface, went into sudden clinical death. It seemed Scarface had to party for both while Van Damme was busy filming. All joking aside, giving up your only chance of a comeback in years to support your loved one is a respectable move. The dog later recovered, and Van Damme said God rewarded him for this sacrifice with participation in The Expendables 2. The story with The Expendables is actually quite interesting. Van Damme refused to participate in the first part. However, JCVD deeply moved Stallone, and he approached Jean-Claude again with an offer to play the villain in the sequel. The Expendables 2, released in 2012, grossed $314 million on a budget of $100 million. That was the only film with Van Damme that made it to American cinemas after the flop of the second Universal Soldier in 1999. Critics praised the Belgian the most among other Chad oldies for his enhanced dramatic performance, they say. Van Damme has moments of brilliance sometimes, such as the Volvo truck commercial or the Jean-Claude Van Johnson series under the direction of Ridley Scott. But these do not significantly change his situation in the movie industry. It's hard to say the actor was ruined by poor role choices. When Jean-Claude started his career, he did everything for the success of his films. Unlike many, he's truly a self-made man. But by 1992, when real success finally reached Van Damme, the actor was faster and ran ahead of it. A difficult character, often accompanying talent, combined with a growing ego made him unbearable for colleagues, and this was later buffed with drugs to a genuine mental disorder. It was a vicious circle. Drugs caused anxiety, which was worsened by a declining career, leading him back to drugs. In this regard, the Belgian somewhat deserves empathy. If he had taken control of himself and his life a bit earlier, he would have had a much better chance for a triumphant comeback. In the 2020s, he apparently doesn't film as much as he could and spends more time with his family. He is still with his fifth wife, who was also his third wife. She supported him during his rise period until 1992, and later, when they reunited in 1999, he said that she had always been his true love. God gave him his dream of being a superstar, and then immediately knocked him down to teach him the true values of a man. Maybe it's just his age, but he seems to have learned his lesson.